Welcome to USA News Channel. Please like and subscribe for the first get new video update from us. Thank you.
Now, despite almost complete diplomatic isolation and crushing international sanctions, North Korea is still able to secure foreign currency and military equipment. It's been a mystery to many people for a long time, but a new study has peeled the lid back on how this is possible, showing a complex web of falsely registered companies the regime uses to get around those sanctions. Park Ji-won with more.
Can do more, and we're putting as much pressure on them as we can. The last time they completely cut off the oil, North Korea came to the table, and so we've told China they've got to do more. If they don't do more, we're going to take it into our own hands, and then we'll start to deal with secondary sanctions.
A joint study by U.S. research organization, the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, and South Korea's leading think tank, the Sejong Institute, shows that North Korea is relying on diverse, secretive overseas networks to secure foreign currency and necessary military equipment. The paper said, for example, Hong Kong-based company Shangang Trade and Investment made a purchase of military equipment back in 2013. The total payment of $15,000 was paid by Glucom through the Bank of America. Yet Glucom turned out to be operated by North Korea's intelligence agency, and the purchased equipment went into the north. The seller did not realize that Shanghai Trade and Investment was a North Korean company in disguise. The paper says creating and operating these falsely identified trading companies in third countries is how the North Korean regime gets around increasing international sanctions and restrictions and obtains vital foreign exchange earnings. While more information about such companies and overseas networks set up for such illicit transactions by North Korea are becoming known in international financial areas, the paper suggests the international community needs to pressure the North by effectively cutting off these illicit financial activities.
The North Korean leader's got to be pleased with what his rogue regime has been doing and accomplishing over the last couple months. Dangerous for the rest of the world. New images showing Kim Jong-un with government officials, as well as those behind the recent Icbm launch by the country. That missile confirmed by our own experts to be able to target anywhere in the mainland U.S., potentially, as well as potentially having a nuclear payload on top. Following that launch, his government declared that North Korea was a nuclear state, did have a rocket force, leading some of experts that we speak to say that perhaps they'd be willing to talk now if there was a freeze in U.S. exercises with South Korea, which drives them crazy. But there's no sign of that. Wrapping up today, a two-day naval exercise involving U.S., South Korean, and Japanese destroyers equipped with anti-missile gear. The new fear is that North Korea might be developing missiles that could be launched from their submarines. Finally, the Winter Olympics in South Korea, they are less than 2 months away, and they're being held something like 50 miles south of the DMZ. Today, South Korean security officials were going through the drills trying to prevent anything from happening against those games, simulating attacks with chemical weapons, a drone armed with a bomb, even a hostage-taking. Again, a lot of fingers crossed that these, what they call Peace Olympics, will go forward without a hitch.
The United Nations, as I mentioned earlier, the United Nations Security Council holding an emergency meeting this afternoon over the North Korea situation. In London tonight, senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott looks at world reaction to yesterday's missile test.
North Korea taking a propaganda victory lap after launching an intercontinental ballistic missile, which for the first time puts all of mainland U.S. in its range. State TV declaring the country is now a rocket power with the state nuclear force to defend against the U.S. imperialists' nuclear blackmail. Leader Kim Jong-un shown approving the launch of a boosted version of a missile Fox News saw at a military parade in Pyongyang in April.
I think this idea of saying, that for whatever reason they would like to have a credible capability to be able to inflict pain in the United States is really where they're headed.
Worried neighbors reacted after the missile, sent on a high trajectory, landed off the coast of Japan. South Korea staged its own missile drill.
This action does not only increase tension on the Korean peninsula, but gravely endangers the international peace and security.
Even allies of Kim Jong-un showed concern, Russia condemning the launch. China had recently sent a high-level envoy to Pyongyang.
China is gravely concerned about and strongly opposed to North Korea's missile test.
The launch came more than 2 months after the last missile blast and nuclear test. Also, after the U.S. designated North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism. Secretary of State Tillerson says he still wants to give peace a chance.
How much more time are you willing to give the pressure campaign?
As a diplomat, we keep working on it every day.
Just in the past half hour or so, we have seen new pictures released by one of the leading propaganda newspapers of North Korea purporting to show the launch last night of this missile. We have discussed it with one of our leading experts. He thinks they're the real thing. He thinks it confirms what he thinks, and that is that it's based on a missile used in July. The second stage, a stronger stage, a second stage supplying a possible stronger platform for any future use of a nuclear payload. This, as Brett mentioned, the UN Security Council is meeting in special session. The first speech given by the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, calling on all countries to cut off all ties to North Korea in the wake of this launch. Here's a bit more of what she had to say.
We have never sought war with North Korea, and still today, we do not seek it. If war does come, it will be because of continued acts of aggression like we witnessed yesterday. And if war comes, make no mistake, the North Korean regime will be utterly destroyed.
Oh, that's United States Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, calling for China to tighten the pressure on North Korea. This as the United Nations itself made a little-known outreach to Pyongyang. The United Nations Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, just spent 4 days in North Korea. He met with top officials of Kim Jong-un's regime. He'll be back at the UN headquarters in New York this week to brief diplomats there. Feltman is a former career American ambassador who served in both Democratic and Republican administrations. The UN says he and the North Korea's foreign minister both agreed the tensions on the peninsula are the most dangerous security facing the world today. And North Korea's news agency even claims Feltman agreed with the regime that sanctions are hurting humanitarian aid. So, did Feltman's visit help or undermine U.S. efforts to rein in Kim Jong-un? Ambassador John Bolton joins us now, as always, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Fox News contributor, and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. So, Ambassador, isn't talking better than not talking?
Well, not in the case of North Korea. You know, they've used 25 years of international diplomacy to get to a point where they have very nearly achieved their objective of having deliverable nuclear weapons that can hit any target in the United States. Now, what exactly Jeff Feltman accomplished in this mission, we don't really know. Perhaps we'll learn more in the coming week. But in the near term, the more we talk with North Korea, the more that gets extended, the greater the likelihood they will accomplish their objective and get deliverable nuclear weapons, which has been contrary to our policy this entire time.
I mean, what do you think he could say to the Security Council behind closed doors when he meets with them?
Well, if he says anything other than he wants vigorous enforcement of the existing Security Council sanctions resolutions, I'd be very surprised. The problem is the resolutions have not produced the result we wanted. The North Koreans, as demonstrated by their most recent missile launch, continue to make progress and show no signs of letting up, despite whatever economic pain has been caused to the population. Because unlike fat and happy Western bourgeois societies that suddenly find consumer choice restricted, that doesn't affect Kim Jong-un. He couldn't care less what happens to his population, which is already living in a 25 million person prison camp.
Yeah, I mean, the 10% or so estimated starve to death because all the resources go to the regime and the nuclear weapons program, basically. I mean, do you think Feltman's visit, does it open a new line of communication or competing one with efforts by Washington?
Well, I think it must reflect some view by Secretary General Guterres that he wants to try his own diplomacy. I mean, obviously, North Korea has a mission to the UN in New York. You don't need to travel to Pyongyang and spend 4 days there, as Jeff had to do. I mean, I guess second prize is 8 days in Pyongyang. But to the extent that that it says to the North Koreans, if you simply return to the negotiating table, we will try and relieve economic pressure, that's a very bad signal, because at some point it does become in North Korea's advantage, not the U.S. advantage, North Korea's advantage, to start talking
so,
again.
I mean, are they trying to play the UN off of us?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be the first time a rogue state had tried to do that. Saddam Hussein tried it. Others have tried it as well. Depends on who's in the White House. If Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton were in the White House, I'd say it would probably succeed, not to mention Barack Obama. I don't think it'll work with Trump. But this argument that somehow our sanctions are causing humanitarian distress does sound very, very similar to what Saddam and the UN said in both Persian Gulf conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, the North Korean news agency goes further. Let me show you what they say about the visit. They say, quote, the United Nations expressed concern over the heightened situation on the Korean Peninsula and expressed a willingness to work on easing tensions. Okay, that's a good thing. But then says the U.S. policy of hostility toward the DPRK, North Korea, and its nuclear blackmail are to blame for the current tense situation. So, Ambassador, they're blaming us. I mean, why don't they look in the mirror in terms of their nuclear program and their continued missile development?
Well, you know, the North Korean news agency never ceases to amaze their ability to take arguments that have absolutely nothing to do with reality and turn them against the United States. I think it underlines, though, that they do believe that the United States now is serious about the potential use of military force. I don't know whether that will happen or not, but if there's any chance to convince China to take dramatic action, which they have not done yet, or even North Korea to see the light, a minuscule chance in my view, it will only come when they believe that the United States is both prepared to and maybe on the verge of using preemptive force.
All right, we will be reporting this week on Undersecretary Feltman's trip and what he tells the diplomats over in Turtle Bay, and get your reaction, of course, to that too. Ambassador John Bolton, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.